I remember the night Ryan left like a stain I couldn't wash out. It wasn't one of those cinematic blowouts people imagine when they think of marriages falling apart. No shouting, no slammed doors, no broken dishes. Just a quiet argument over bills, a pause that stretched too long, and the soft click of a door closing behind him. He'd been distant for weeks, pacing the house as though every wall pressed too close. When he said, "Maybe I just need to clear my head," I thought it meant an hour's drive. I didn't realize it meant 6 days of silence. At first, I convinced myself it wasn't serious. Ryan had always been moody, prone to retreating when life got loud. He'd disappear into his workshop, or take late drives just to breathe. I told myself he'd text by morning. Then I told myself he'd call by night. By the third day, I stopped making excuses and started imagining accidents. Twisted metal, hospitals, cold hands under white sheets. Each morning I'd wake to the same loop of thoughts. Maybe he lost his phone. Maybe he was camping. Maybe he was proving a point. But even those maybes started to sound like lies I was telling to survive. The house seemed larger without him, its silence too symmetrical. I'd find myself listening for his shoes at the door, his cough from the hallway. There was nothing. On day 2, I called his office. "He's on personal leave," the receptionist said casually, as though I should have known. My stomach sank. Personal leave. From what? From me? I searched for him online. His social media accounts dormant, messages unread. I scrolled through old photos, trying to decode something in his smile, wondering if the distance had been there longer than I wanted to admit. By day 3, my mother offered to come stay with me. I told her not to. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want to hear her say, "Maybe he just needs space," because space was the one thing he'd taken without asking. The nights were the worst. I'd fall asleep to the sound of our ceiling fan, counting each rotation as if it could rewind time. Sometimes I'd wake convinced I'd heard his car. Once I ran barefoot to the porch at 2 a.m., only to face an empty driveway shimmering under streetlight. By day 4, the fear twisted into anger. Not loud anger, just that quiet, burning kind that makes your heart feel like it's shrinking. I replayed every moment leading up to his departure. The look he gave me when I questioned the missing money from our account, how quickly he brushed it off. "It's just a transfer," he'd said. "Don't worry about it." I did worry. I worried enough to check the statements after he left, only to find half the balance gone. I started talking to myself in the kitchen, like maybe the air could answer the questions he'd left behind. Why leave like that? Why not a message? Why not respect enough to say goodbye? On day 5, I stopped calling. I stopped hoping. I made tea, cleaned the counters, folded his shirts. Not because I wanted to, but because normalcy felt like rebellion. If he wanted to vanish, I wouldn't let the absence destroy me. And yet, every time I heard tires outside, my heart betrayed me. I'd freeze, listen, and then sink again when it wasn't him. Hope is cruel like that. It doesn't die easily. It waits. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the maple trees. The neighborhood kids were chasing each other in the street, their laughter floating across the dusk. I envied their simplicity, their ability to live in the moment without needing explanations. My phone remained stubbornly silent. No missed calls, no texts, just the same blank screen reflecting my face back at me, asking the question I was too afraid to voice. What if he doesn't come back? By the 6th morning, something in me shifted. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't pacing. I was just still. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and stared at the driveway. Empty, predictable mine. Maybe that was the beginning of acceptance. Or maybe it was exhaustion masquerading as peace. I'd begun to imagine the rest of my life without him. How I'd explain it to friends. How I'd file the papers. How I'd move on. I even rehearsed the story in my head. He left, and I learned to stand. It almost sounded empowering. But life, in its strange timing, never waits for your emotional readiness. That afternoon, while folding laundry, I heard it. The low rumble of an engine pulling into the driveway. My hands froze mid-fold. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks again. Then came the unmistakable sound of tires crunching gravel, the slam of a car door, and, absurdly, a whistle. His whistle. A casual, carefree tune, the same one he used to hum while making coffee. The sound sliced through the air, sharp and unreal. My heart stumbled, and for a heartbeat I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or scream. 6 days. 6 days of silence, fear, and sleepless nights. And he came back whistling. I didn't move to the door. I just stood there, listening as his keys jingled, the lock turned, and his familiar footsteps crossed the threshold. My chest felt hollow, filled with too many unsaid words. He stepped into the living room as if returning from an errand, not an emotional disappearance. His hair was tousled, his face freshly shaven, his shirt new. He smiled, not sheepishly, not apologetically, but smugly. Like someone who'd won something I didn't know we were playing for. "Hey," he said lightly, tossing his keys into the bowl by the door. "Miss me?" My mouth opened, but no sound came out. The words I'd practiced vanished. All I could do was stare at him. This man I thought I knew, as the echo of his whistle lingered in the air. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The man who'd come back wasn't the same one who'd left. On the 6th day, I heard his car pull in, and his whistle, like nothing happened. He came back like nothing had happened, as if vanishing for nearly a week was some kind of self-care retreat he owed no explanation for. Ryan dropped his duffel bag beside the couch, the same couch I'd spent 6 nights staring at, and said, "I just needed space. Space." That word echoed through me like a slap. I wanted to ask, space from what? From our marriage? From responsibility? From the truth? But his tone, casual, almost amused, told me that any question I asked would make me look desperate. So I said nothing. I just nodded, as though 6 days of silence was something I could politely accept. He walked past me, heading straight for the kitchen. "You still using the dark roast?" he asked over his shoulder, opening the cabinet like it hadn't been days since he'd last touched it. His ease was unnerving. Every move felt practiced, like he'd rehearsed how to return, where to stand, what to say, how to seem unaffected. When he finally sat down, coffee mug in hand, he flashed that smirk, the one I used to love, before I realized how often it followed a lie. It wasn't a smile of warmth. It was control, that tiny curve of the mouth that said, "I know something you don't." I watched him sip, pretending not to notice me watching. My stomach twisted at the sight of his confidence. It wasn't relief or guilt that filled his eyes. It was something colder. Satisfaction, maybe. Triumph. He caught me staring and leaned back, one arm draped over the chair. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "I could say the same," I replied. My voice surprised me, calm, steady. I half expected it to shake. He shrugged, like the last 6 days had been an inconvenience to me, not a disappearance. "I told you I needed to clear my head. You overthink everything, you know that?" There it was, the shift, the narrative flip. I wasn't the abandoned wife anymore. I was the overreacting one. A familiar pattern? I forced a small smile. "You could have told me that before you left." He smirked again, eyes flicking toward his phone as it buzzed against the table. His hand moved fast, too fast to silence it. He didn't even glance at the screen, which told me he already knew who it was. I said nothing, but my chest went tight. That tiny motion, the quick grab, the practiced composure, spoke louder than any confession could. "Work stuff," he muttered, setting the phone face down. "You wouldn't get it." "Try me," I said softly. He looked at me for a long moment, his jaw tightening. "Let's not do this right now," he said finally, as if I were the one spoiling the moment. I nodded again. I was learning. His words weren't meant to explain. They were meant to end the conversation before it started. That's what the smirk was, a wall built out of arrogance and half-truths. He started talking about mundane things, traffic, the weather, how the gas prices had gone up, as if we'd just skipped a week instead of living separate realities. I nodded at the right times, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Every word he said was static to me now, background noise to the questions multiplying in my head. When he went upstairs to shower, I stayed seated, staring at the faint ring his coffee mug had left on the table. It was such an ordinary thing, and yet it felt like evidence, proof that he'd been here, that this wasn't just another illusion of hope. Then I heard his phone buzz again. Once. Twice. A pause. Then a soft chime, the sound of an incoming photo. My pulse spiked. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. His behavior already told me more than any message could. The distance, the sudden space, the smug return. It all lined up into a picture that made too much sense and hurt too much to say aloud. When he came back downstairs, hair damp, sleeves rolled up, he looked lighter. He even hummed the same tune he'd whistled when he arrived. The familiarity of it made my skin crawl. He noticed me watching and gave that same infuriating smirk again. "What?" he said playfully. "You look like you're about to interrogate me." I smiled this time. A slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach my eyes either. "No," I said, "just thinking." He grinned, clearly pleased that I wasn't pushing. Maybe he thought the storm had passed. Maybe he thought I'd forgiven him already. But inside, something in me had gone still. Not broken, not panicked, just focused. Because I knew what that smirk meant now. It wasn't confidence. It was arrogance built on the belief that I was still in the dark. And that was his first mistake. So when he sat across from me, phone back in his pocket, humming under his breath, I smiled too, calm and quiet, a mirror of his own expression. Because I already had questions only silence could answer. Rumors always travel faster than truth in small towns. At first, I brushed off the glances, the hesitations in people's voices when they asked, "How's Ryan?" With that stretched politeness that says they know something you don't. I smiled through it, the polite, professional kind of smile I'd mastered as a school counselor. The kind that hides the storm brewing just beneath the skin, but whispers have a way of echoing louder when you're alone. It started with Jenna from the bakery. She said it casually, as though she were mentioning the weather. "Thought I saw Ryan near the plaza last week. He looked good. Who was that woman with him? Your sister?" She laughed, and I laughed too, pretending not to notice the careful way she studied my reaction. I told her it must have been someone else. But when I got home, I couldn't shake the sound of her voice. Light, teasing, almost apologetic. The kind of tone people use when they're trying to soften gossip they believe is true. Ryan had been going out for work calls again, claiming a client needed late meetings. I started noting the times, the patterns, leaving just after dinner, returning near midnight, always with that faint cologne that wasn't his usual. And then there was the perfume. A subtle floral trace that didn't belong in our house. I first caught it on his shirt when I picked it up from the laundry basket. It wasn't the musky scent I wore, nor the kind of fragrance that clung accidentally. This was deliberate, feminine, assertive. The next morning at school, while helping a student calm down after an argument, I caught myself staring at the child's trembling hands and realizing my own were shaking too. I told myself to stop overanalyzing. That paranoia was unbecoming. But every story he told, every timeline, had small cracks now, and I was the only one who noticed. That evening when Ryan came home, I asked about his day as I usually did. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Exhausting. You know how clients are." His phone buzzed again, screen lighting up with a message from a name I didn't recognize, just an initial and a heart emoji. He turned it face down instantly. My pulse quickened. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just work." He didn't even look up. I wanted to scream, but instead I nodded, smiling like a fool, thinking of all the women I'd counseled over the years. Women who said, "I saw the signs, but I didn't want to believe them." I never imagined I'd become one of them. That night, while he showered, I sat in the dark at the kitchen table with his discarded receipts scattered before me. Gas station, grocery store, bar tab, normal enough. But one caught my eye, a restaurant I didn't recognize. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. The date was from the same night he'd told me his client needed him late. I folded it neatly and slipped it into a drawer. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Something inside me whispered that confrontation was exactly what he wanted. to paint me as irrational, to control the narrative before the truth emerged. So instead, I started documenting, quietly, every lie, every inconsistency, every work call. I became my own private investigator, not out of vengeance yet, but survival. A week later, at the grocery store, Mrs. Dempsey from down the street stopped me. "Tell Ryan I said hi," she chirped, her voice just a little too cheerful. "Didn't know he liked Italian food. That new place downtown is lovely." My breath caught. The same restaurant as the receipt. I smiled politely and thanked her, but my chest felt hollow. I drove home in silence, the hum of the car loud against my thoughts. When I parked, I didn't go inside right away. I sat there, staring at the front door, at the home that suddenly felt like a stage set. Everything inside looked the same, but none of it felt real anymore. Later that night, while Ryan was asleep, I went through his briefcase. Not his phone, he guarded that too well. But in the inner pocket, folded like a secret, was another receipt. Different date, same restaurant, same pattern, except this one was stranger. The card used wasn't his. It was mine. I checked the details twice, thinking it must have been a mistake, but there it was. My name, my credit card number, my account. And the total wasn't for dinner this time. It was for a hotel suite, under my name. The paper trembled in my hand as my mind raced through possibilities. Forged signature, duplicate card, or something worse. Because whatever game Ryan was playing, it wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was deception, planned and deliberate. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a man coming home from an affair. This was a man setting the stage for something bigger. Something dangerous. The receipt wasn't for dinner. It was for a hotel suite, under my name. The morning after I found the hotel receipt, I looked in the mirror and decided that panic wasn't an option anymore. Fear made people sloppy, and if Ryan was planning something that required my name on a hotel bill, then I needed to be precise. So I became calm. Deliberately, methodically calm. At work, I smiled like always. I handed out stickers to the first graders who remembered their reading logs, gave advice to teenagers who thought the world was ending because of friendship drama. I was steady, approachable. The same Mrs. Walker who always had tissues and granola bars in her drawer. No one would have guessed that my evenings were spent cataloging lies. Every night I made mental notes. How long his showers lasted. How many unread messages flashed across his screen. Which cologne he wore. Which shirt he chose. It all mattered now. It all formed patterns. Ryan noticed my serenity, and it seemed to confuse him. He tried to bait me once, throwing out careless lines like, "You're awfully quiet these days." "Everything okay?" "Just tired, I'd say. Work's been heavy." He nodded, pretending to care. But I saw it. That flicker of unease behind his smirk. He didn't expect indifference. He expected confrontation, tears, or begging. Silence wasn't in his playbook. The irony was almost poetic. I was finally the calmest I'd ever been, and he was starting to unravel. At night, I began journaling. Not for reflection, for evidence. Every entry was dated, timed, and factual. When he left, when he came back, when he lied. I kept the notebook hidden in a file labeled Tax Documents 2021, the one folder I knew he'd never touch. Sometimes, I'd replay conversations in my head, analyzing them like a counselor evaluating a patient's defense mechanisms. His word choice, his posture, his tone, it was all there. The arrogance of someone who thought he'd already won. But the calm was a mask. Underneath it was something colder, quieter. Not rage. Precision. When he came home one evening whistling, carrying takeout from that same Italian restaurant, I felt my stomach twist. "Thought we could eat in tonight," he said cheerfully, as if he were doing me a favor. I smiled and took the bag from his hands. We ate together, him talking about how exhausting work had been. He never noticed that I barely touched my food. My mind was elsewhere, on my next move. Later, while doing laundry, I found another trace of that perfume on his collar. This time I didn't cry. I folded the shirt neatly, pressed it smooth, and placed it back in his drawer. let him think I hadn't noticed. In truth, every detail was being logged. I'd even started collecting small recordings, snippets of his voice, his calls on speakerphone when he forgot I was nearby. Most were harmless. Some weren't. The most revealing were the pauses, the silences where his tone softened, his voice lowered. Not the voice of a husband talking to his wife, but a man weaving lies to someone else. The pieces were aligning now. He was either having an affair or setting me up for something that would require my name, my signature, my trust. Maybe both. Either way, I couldn't let him see I knew. I began planning subtle tests, questions that sounded casual but carried hidden traps. Didn't you say your client's name was Robert? I thought you mentioned Richard last week. Small corrections that forced him to improvise. Every lie he told built my foundation stronger. Each evening I made sure the house looked peaceful. Candles lit, dinner ready, music soft in the background. A stage, a perfect illusion of domestic tranquility, the kind of calm that disarms predators. He'd lean against the counter, smile that smug little smile and say, "See? I told you everything's fine," and I'd nod, my lips curling just enough to sell the act. He thought he was watching me, but I was watching him, studying every breath, every blink, every misplaced story, because one truth had settled deep in my chest. Calm wasn't surrender. It was strategy. That night I cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary the way he liked it. I poured wine, set the table, even dimmed the lights. He'd think I was melting back into routine. But as I placed the last dish down, I slipped a tiny recording device under the table, right beneath his plate. I placed his favorite meal on the table that night, and a small recording device beneath it. The first recording I played back was mostly static, just Ryan clearing his throat, mumbling to himself while scrolling on his phone. But then came a sentence that made my blood run cold. "She has no idea," he said. A pause. Then softer. "By next month I'll be free." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside him, pretending to breathe evenly, memorizing the rhythm of his body beside mine. The man I married was planning a quiet erasure of our life, and he thought he was being clever. Over the next few days, I collected more fragments. A voice memo here, a forwarded message there. I learned to act casual while my world cracked open piece by piece. One morning, while folding laundry, I heard his phone buzz on the dresser. A preview flashed, a message from someone saved as L. It read, "Can't wait till it's just us." "Did you talk to her about the account yet?" My hands trembled, but I forced myself to finish folding. Later that night, I waited until he fell asleep, then checked the joint account online. The balance was missing a significant chunk, several thousand gone. Transferred out 3 days earlier. The story started piecing itself together without his help. Ryan wasn't just cheating. He was preparing an exit. The hotel receipts, the fake meetings, the smug calm, all of it pointed to a plan. He was moving in with her, a younger woman, probably someone from his office, who mistook arrogance for confidence. I found a series of deleted voice memos on his shared cloud folder, remnants he thought were erased. In one, he spoke to someone laughing. "She's too trusting. I'll move some of it now. Say it's for an investment. Once I'm settled, I'll tell her I'm done. She'll survive. She always does." That last part, "she'll survive," was almost kind in his mind, like a man giving a dog leftovers before leaving town. But kindness wasn't what I heard. I heard contempt. At work, I functioned like a ghost, guiding students through their heartbreaks while my own heart folded in on itself. Every small detail felt sharper now. The sting of his cologne on my pillow, the casual way he whistled while shaving, the smug curve of his smile when he thought I wasn't watching. He believed my silence was ignorance. That I was the same woman who once trusted his half-truths and financial excuses. But he didn't realize the difference between confusion and strategy. A week later, I followed him. After school, I parked near the downtown plaza and waited. When he emerged from the cafe, she was with him. Young, polished, glowing in that reckless way people do when they think they've won something that isn't truly theirs. He placed his hand on her back, gentle and familiar. I recognized the gesture instantly. He used to do it to guide me through doors. I took a photo from my car, then another, not for revenge but for record-keeping, because someday I might need proof that the man who called me his anchor had been rehearsing his escape long before I noticed. That evening, I made tea and listened to another saved message. This one wasn't deleted, his voice casual, a little too proud. Yeah, I'll move in by the end of the month. She's got no clue. Keeps cooking dinner like everything's normal. I'll cash out the joint savings and cover the lease up front. It's under my name, but she won't even notice till it's too late. My heart should have broken. Instead, it hardened. The next morning, I called the bank. Calmly. Politely. Explained that I wanted to close the joint account due to upcoming financial separation. A perfectly legal move. One the bank representative confirmed required only one signature if the account was joint with equal rights. By noon, every dollar was moved. That night, Ryan came home humming, tossing his jacket carelessly over the chair. He poured himself a drink and grinned at me like nothing had changed. "You seem happier," he said. "Finally relaxed, huh?" "Something like that," I replied. He thought my stillness meant surrender. But my silence had become armor, and every secret he thought he was hiding was now my weapon. He sat at the table, swirling his glass, completely unaware that the empire he built on deceit had already collapsed. Because by the time he smiled that smug, satisfied smile, the joint account, his precious safety net, was gone. Legally, and he had no idea. But he didn't know that the joint account had already been emptied. Legally. The truth was, the plan hadn't begun when I found the hotel receipt. It had started weeks earlier, when I first felt something shift in Ryan's eyes. There's a certain silence that creeps into a marriage long before the words "I'm done" are ever spoken. It's in the way conversations shorten, the way laughter sounds forced, the way presence becomes performance. I noticed it before he vanished, before the lies even took shape. That's when I called my lawyer, Melissa. I told her I didn't know what I was preparing for, only that I could feel something coming. She didn't ask for proof. She just listened. Then she said softly, "Let's make sure whatever happens, you're protected." We spent an afternoon drafting quiet safeguards, a new checking account under my name only, adjusted beneficiaries, clauses for separation. I signed the papers, not because I wanted to end my marriage, but because I refused to be blindsided by it. Melissa slid a thick manila envelope across her desk. "Keep this somewhere safe," she said. "If he ever crosses a line, financially or emotionally, you'll know what to do." Inside were pre-signed separation documents, account transfers, and a detailed record of our financial holdings. There was also space for evidence, notes, photos, and any documentation I might later need. She'd even included a checklist. Be calm. Be factual. Be early. I remember clutching that envelope like it was both a shield and a confession. Part of me hated what it represented. The quiet acknowledgement that love might not be enough. But another part of me felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for Ryan to decide what happened next. Back then, he was already growing colder. He'd stopped texting me during the day, started working late more often. Once I asked if everything was okay between us. He smiled, that tired smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "You're imagining things." So I stopped asking and started preparing. The envelope lived in the back of my closet, tucked beneath old sweaters in a box labeled winter scarves. Every few days I'd take it out just to make sure it was still there, tangible proof that I wasn't powerless. Over time, I began slipping in small things, printouts of suspicious transactions, copies of his work schedule, even a few screenshots of texts that didn't feel right. Each addition made me feel steadier. Less like a woman waiting for her world to collapse, and more like someone quietly laying the foundation for her freedom. The day he vanished, claiming some vague need for space, I didn't panic. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same one he'd just walked out of, and stared at the dent his body left in the sheets. I waited exactly 1 hour. Then I opened the closet, retrieved the envelope, and placed it on his pillow. It wasn't spite. It was symmetry. When he returned 6 days later, smug and whistling, I watched him glance at the bed. His eyes paused on the brown corner of the envelope peeking out from under the pillowcase. I saw the flicker of curiosity, then dismissal. He assumed it was nothing, maybe paperwork or mail. He didn't touch it, and that was fine, because I wasn't ready for him to know. The documents inside were more than just legal forms. They were the story of his downfall written in ink. Every signature, every timestamp, every receipt told the truth he thought he'd buried. I'd even included a short letter at the end, not angry, not emotional, just factual. If you're reading this, it means I've decided not to be your victim. The choices you made are your own. This is me choosing mine. Some nights while he slept, I'd imagine the moment he'd finally open it. The stillness, the confusion, the disbelief turning into panic. The truth sitting quietly in his hands, waiting to be read. He thought I was naive. He thought I was still that woman begging him to talk, to explain, to love me the way he used to. He was wrong, because that envelope had been waiting on his pillow since the day he left. The night felt rehearsed, as if the universe had been waiting for this dinner. I'd spent the afternoon preparing Ryan's favorite meal again. Roasted chicken, glazed carrots, a bottle of Merlot breathing on the counter. Every movement was deliberate, every detail composed. Calm wasn't a facade anymore. It was muscle memory. When he walked in, he looked lighter than he had in weeks, as if he'd already moved past the inconvenience of deceiving me. "Something smells good," he said, setting his keys on the table. His tone carried that smug ease of a man who thought he'd regained control. "It's been a while since we had a quiet dinner," I replied, smiling. "Figured we could catch up," he chuckled, loosening his tie. "Guess I owe you that after disappearing, huh?" The way he said it, playful, teasing, made something inside me still completely. He poured himself wine, taking the head of the table as though nothing had happened, as though vanishing for 6 days and lying for months were minor quirks in a long marriage. "You worried too much," he said between bites. "I just needed time to think. You know how stress gets to me." I nodded slowly, swirling my own glass. "You're right," I said softly. Maybe I did. That answer pleased him. His smirk deepened, his posture relaxed. He mistook composure for forgiveness, silence for surrender. I'd learned his tells. The way he leaned back when he felt superior. The way he gestured broadly when convincing himself of a lie. He started bragging in the subtlest ways, as if testing the boundaries. Mentioning business opportunities, new friends, and plans to invest more boldly this time. Each word carried the weight of something he wanted me to notice, a performance designed to measure my reaction. I smiled, nodded, poured more wine. My heart was steady. When the conversation faltered, he filled the silence with laughter, the kind of hollow sound people use to keep power in the room. "You know," he said, carving into his chicken, "you really shouldn't let your imagination run wild. I get it. 6 days is a long time, but come on, honey, you know me." He paused, expecting my defense, my question, my hurt. But I gave him nothing. Just a quiet hum, eyes steady on his. The silence stretched between us, soft, suffocating, almost tender. The kind of silence that makes liars uncomfortable because it reflects their own noise back at them. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, and forced a laugh. "You're really quiet tonight," I smiled. "Just listening." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Confusion, maybe unease. Then he shrugged it off. "Well," he said, "I'm glad we're moving past all that. No need for drama. That was his word for betrayal." I took a sip of wine and studied him. The ease, the arrogance, the certainty that I was still the woman he could manipulate with a few empty reassurances. But my silence wasn't submission. It was revelation. Every second of that dinner felt like a slow unveiling. Each word he spoke only confirmed what I already knew. Not from intuition, but from evidence. The emails, the recordings, the transfers, the woman. all of it, yet I said nothing. Because tonight wasn't about truth. It was about theater. He lifted his glass, toasting to fresh starts and less overthinking. I clinked mine gently, watching the red swirl. When dessert came, I set a single plate in front of him, a slice of lemon pie, his favorite. The silver fork gleamed in the low light. I took my seat across from him, folded my hands, and smiled. He grinned back, oblivious, cutting into the pie with satisfaction. "You really outdid yourself tonight," he said. The silence that followed was thick enough to hum. He didn't notice at first, not until he lifted his fork for another bite. That's when his gaze flicked downward, and he froze. Beneath his plate, partially hidden by the rim, was the corner of a brown envelope. His name was written on it. When he lifted the fork, he saw his name on the envelope beneath his plate. At first, he laughed. That kind of brittle, nervous laughter people use when they think they still have control. "What's this supposed to be?" Ryan asked, holding the brown envelope between two fingers like it might stain him. "A love letter? Divorce papers? Come on, you're better than this." I didn't move. I just sipped my wine and said, "Open it." He hesitated, then tore the flap with a careless rip, still smirking, still believing this was a game he'd already won. The smirk didn't last. As he pulled out the stack of papers, his expression shifted, amusement thinning into confusion, then tightening into something raw and unguarded. Pages rustled. I watched his eyes flick across them. The bank transactions, the hotel receipts, the screenshots, the phone transcripts. His fingers began to tremble slightly. What is this?" he muttered, his voice quieter now. "Documentation," I said. "Of everything you did in the past 6 months." He scoffed, trying to recover his confidence. "You think you can scare me with this? You don't even know the half of it." "I know enough," I said evenly. "The joint account withdrawals, the cash transfers to your new credit card, the hotel stays under my name, the messages, every detail." He slammed the papers on the table, the wine glasses trembling from the impact. "You went through my stuff?" "That's invasion of privacy." I tilted my head slightly. "So is betraying your wife." The silence that followed was suffocating. Only the hum of the refrigerator filled the room. That, and his uneven breathing. He looked down at the legal notice now, the official stamp glaring under the light. "You filed for separation?" he asked, his tone cracking somewhere between disbelief and anger. 3 weeks ago, I replied. "My lawyer said it would be simpler this way. Everything divided fairly, after you walked out." He stared at me, jaw tight. "You were planning this before I even left." "Yes," I said softly. "I knew you'd give me a reason." He pushed away from the table, pacing, one hand raking through his hair. "You're insane. You think you can just, catch me in some petty lie and end everything we built?" "Petty?" I repeated, almost laughing. "You emptied our savings, Ryan. You planned to move in with someone else using the money I helped earn." "That's not petty," his nostrils flared. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my tone still calm. "You thought I'd be too emotional to notice, too soft to fight back. You underestimated silence." That landed. He froze, turning to look at me. Not the woman he'd lied to, but the woman sitting still and unshaken in front of him. He tried again, desperate now. "Look, I made mistakes, okay? But we can fix this. I was confused. I needed 6 days?" I asked quietly. "You needed 6 days to find her? To spend our money on hotel rooms and wine?" "I heard everything, Ryan. Every call. Every lie you practiced in your car before coming home." He blinked rapidly. "You were listening?" I nodded. "I learned that silence makes people speak more than questions ever will." He sat back down, deflated but still clinging to bravado. "So what now? You want me to apologize? Grovel? You think you've won?" "This isn't about winning," I said. "It's about clarity." I leaned forward slightly, my voice soft but unwavering. "The transfers have already been moved. The house deed's been secured. Your name is off every account except one, the one I left with enough for you to start over." His mouth opened, but no words came. "The rest," I continued, "is documented. My lawyer has copies, and before you think of threatening or manipulating me again, I've already shared everything with my sister. with timestamps. If anything happens, they know where to look. He stared down at the papers again, his face pale now, the smugness completely drained. You planned this, he whispered. Every bit of it. Yes, I said. While you thought I was breaking down, I was building proof. He sank back in his chair, rubbing his temples. You don't even sound angry. I admitted. But anger burns out. Strategy doesn't. He laughed again, a hollow, desperate sound. You really think you're the hero in this? No, I said. Just the woman who stopped being your fool. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint tick of the wall clock counting the seconds between us. He kept rereading the papers as if they might rearrange themselves, as if some part of this nightmare could still be undone. Finally, he looked up. You've destroyed us, he said bitterly. No, I replied, standing slowly. You did that. I just turned the lights on so we could both see it clearly. He flinched at that. Not physically, but in the subtle way his face faltered, realizing that the power he'd once held was gone. I gathered the remaining dishes, my movements deliberate, unhurried. He stayed frozen at the table, surrounded by the evidence of his own undoing. When I passed behind him, I paused just long enough to say, You should leave tonight. The locks change in the morning. He didn't argue. For the first time since his return, Ryan was truly silent. Not smug, not defensive, silent. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room. It swallows it whole. As I turned off the dining light, the room dimmed to a warm, fading amber. The envelope lay open beside his plate, its contents spilling like confessions across the tablecloth. He finally looked at me and saw someone he couldn't manipulate. He followed me into the living room, still holding the envelope like it might suddenly explain itself. His voice shook with forced charm, the kind he used whenever he was cornered. Listen, I messed up, okay? It was stupid. It didn't mean anything. You know how stressed I've been about work. About the bills. I needed a break, that's all. A break. That word made me laugh, quietly, almost kindly. 6 days of silence, I said. That's not a break, Ryan, that's abandonment. He started pacing again, every sentence tangled in excuses. You're overreacting. I never stopped loving you. I needed to clear my head. I didn't even sleep with her. I looked at him, my face calm, my hands resting in my lap. I don't need details, I said. Just the keys, he froze. What? The house keys, I repeated softly. Leave them on the table. He stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. His eyes darted from me to the papers, then to the front door, as if searching for a script to follow. You're not even going to talk about this? Just kick me out? No, I said. I'm just done giving you the luxury of my words. The quiet between us was heavy, deliberate. He opened his mouth again, but the silence swallowed him. I could see it sinking in, that I wasn't fighting anymore, that I wouldn't feed his need for reaction or guilt. You can't do this, he said finally, desperation leaking through his voice. I said I was sorry. I told you the truth! I shook my head. You told me fragments. I already had the truth. He slammed his hand against the wall, his frustration loud and childish. So that's it? Years together, and you just throw it away? I stood slowly, meeting his height without raising my tone. You threw it away when you walked out. I'm just closing the door you left open. His shoulders slumped. I watched the fight leave him in waves. The man who came back smug and self-assured now looked smaller, diminished by the weight of his own lies. He picked up the keys from the bowl by the door, the sound of metal against wood echoing like punctuation. Where am I supposed to go? He muttered. You have options, I said. You just can't stay here. He looked at me, searching for softness, forgiveness, anything familiar. I offered none. For once, the silence wasn't cold. It was power, steady and earned. He lingered, trying one last performance. You'll regret this. You think you're strong now, but when it's quiet, you'll miss me. I almost smiled. I already survived the quiet, Ryan. You just never noticed. He blinked, then turned away, defeated. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, the same hallway where we used to laugh, argue, make plans that now felt like fiction. I heard drawers opening, suitcases unzipping, the rhythm of someone realizing their life no longer fits in the space they once claimed. I didn't follow. I stayed in the living room, the soft hum of the lamp casting a faint glow over the coffee table. For years, my silence had been mistaken for weakness. Tonight, it was the sound of control. After a while, the zipper closed. He came back, suitcase in hand, shoulders caved. "You're really not gonna say anything?" he asked again, like maybe repetition could reverse time. I met his eyes one last time. "Goodbye, Ryan. No shouting, no crying. Just that." He hesitated at the door, then left. The moment it clicked shut, the house exhaled, and so did I. For the first time in months, I felt the kind of calm that doesn't need witnesses. I walked to the window, watching his car pull away into the fading orange of evening. The driveway looked wider, emptier, almost peaceful. I picked up my phone, my hand steady, and opened the messages. His arrogance had left a digital trail longer than his apologies ever would. One message stood out, the hotel confirmation, under my name, for the honeymoon suite. He'd booked it 2 days before he vanished. I smiled faintly. The same calm, deliberate smile I'd worn at dinner. Then I typed a short message to the hotel manager. Polite, professional. "Please cancel the reservation under my name." Effective immediately. As the message sent, I stared at the reflection in the window. For the first time, I recognized myself again, not as the woman waiting for explanations, but as the woman who no longer needed them. Outside, the evening swallowed the last of his taillights. As he packed, I texted the hotel manager to cancel the honeymoon suite, in my name. It didn't take long for the silence to start talking on its own. I never told anyone what happened, but people sensed it, the shift, the stillness that replaced the chaos. At work, my coworkers stopped asking about Ryan. They used to ask casually, the way people do when they assume everything's fine. Now they only offered small smiles, the kind reserved for someone who has walked through fire and come out whole. At first, I kept my routine identical. I went to work, attended meetings, laughed at the right moments, but beneath the normalcy, something powerful unfolded. I didn't need to defend myself or explain why my husband had suddenly disappeared from my photos, or why I'd switched to my maiden name on email. The absence spoke for itself. Rumors found their way into the small-town rhythm, whispered versions of what might have happened. A few thought we separated peacefully. Others said he'd run off with someone younger. I never confirmed or denied. My silence was both shield and weapon. Meanwhile, Ryan tried to stage his own narrative. I heard from a mutual friend that he'd been spotted at a bar, drunk, telling stories about a misunderstanding. But lies wilt quickly without oxygen, and no one rushed to defend him this time. The same people who once admired his confidence now found it hollow. They'd seen the receipts, the missing money, the canceled reservation, though not from me. Truth has a way of leaking through the cracks liars leave behind. At school, one of the teachers, kind, observant, pulled me aside after a staff meeting. "You seem lighter lately," she said. "Did something good happen?" I smiled. "Something ended," I said. "Sometimes that's good too." Word spread not through gossip, but through tone. People noticed that my laughter returned, that I didn't flinch when someone mentioned his name, that I no longer carried invisible tension in my shoulders. Reputation, it turned out, could repair itself quietly, when built on calm truth rather than noisy defense. I saw him once, weeks later, at the grocery store. He looked smaller somehow. A few heads turned when he passed. Someone whispered. He caught my eye briefly, his face pale with recognition, then turned away. That moment wasn't victory. It was balance, the world quietly rearranging itself. He'd underestimated what silence could do. He thought revenge meant public exposure, dramatic scenes, shouting his sins for everyone to hear. But silence has an echo. It moves through rooms, through glances, through the way people look at you after they've learned who you really are. I never said a word about what he'd done. I didn't need to. The story wrote itself in the gaps he left, in the way people stopped asking about him, in the way they looked at me with respect instead of pity. He lost something far more valuable than comfort or pride. He lost the version of himself he performed for others. And I didn't lift a finger to take it from him. He thought I'd tell everyone. I didn't have to. I sat by the window that Sunday morning, the house so still I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of wind brushing through the maple trees. The envelope was gone, the tension too, replaced by quiet that felt both strange and holy. I pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began to write. Not to Ryan, not to anyone else, but to the woman who had waited, doubted, endured, and finally acted. Dear me, I began, the words shaky at first. You kept trying to be enough for someone who had already decided to look elsewhere for validation. You apologized for the storms you didn't create. You mistook endurance for loyalty. Each sentence felt like exhaling a lifetime of silence. I wrote about the early days, the charm, the laughter, the way Ryan used to hold my hand like it was a promise. I wrote about the slow unraveling, how affection turned into obligation, and how I'd let myself believe that patience could fix deceit. It wasn't just about him. It was about me, the part of me that thought love meant shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. I had carried that belief like a badge of honor, confusing sacrifice for strength. Now I saw it differently. Strength wasn't in staying. It was in knowing when to walk away with dignity intact. I paused and stared out the window. The world looked unchanged. Cars passing, birds on wires, yet everything inside me had shifted. The ache was still there, but softer, shaped now by understanding rather than blame. I wrote, You're allowed to miss what you thought you had, even if it was never real. You're allowed to grieve the version of him that only existed in your hope, but don't ever confuse pain with purpose. For years, I'd measured my worth through the reflection in his eyes. And when that reflection dimmed, I thought I'd lost myself. Now I realized that the mirror was always warped. I'd been whole all along. I just forgot where to look. Tears blurred the ink as I wrote about forgiveness, not the kind that absolves betrayal, but the kind that releases its hold. Forgiving him wasn't the goal. He'd built his own prison out of lies. But forgiving myself? That was freedom. I forgave the woman who begged for answers from someone unworthy of her questions. I forgave the nights spent rationalizing red flags, the mornings I pretended his distance was just stress, the countless times I bit my tongue to keep peace that never truly existed. The letter grew into something like a vow, that I would never again silence myself to protect someone else's comfort. That love next time would be mutual, transparent, and safe. And that my solitude was not punishment, it was peace rediscovered. When I finally signed my name, my hand trembled. Not from pain, but release. I folded the letter neatly and placed it inside a drawer. Not to hide it, but to remind myself where I'd started if I ever forgot how far I'd come. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering the last of the autumn leaves. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the urge to check my phone, my bank account, or the door. I just breathed, deeply, freely, without fear. Forgiving myself didn't mean forgetting. It meant finally breathing. It was late February when I found the courage to finish the last piece of unfinished business. The snow had just begun to melt, revealing patches of brown grass and forgotten footprints along the driveway. The house looked different now, lighter somehow, like it had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I stood by the kitchen counter, the morning sun spilling across a plain white envelope. No drama, no secrets, just finality. Inside was a single document, the deed transfer, now bearing only my name. It wasn't about ownership or punishment. It was about truth, the home that once echoed with our shared laughter, our arguments, our lies, now belonged entirely to the person who had endured them all. For months, I'd hesitated to send it. Not because I owed him anything, but because part of me wondered if I was ready to close the door completely. Closure, I'd learned, isn't a single moment. It's a series of quiet decisions that slowly stop hurting. I remembered the day I'd filed the paperwork. My lawyer had asked if I wanted the notice delivered through official mail or personally. I'd chosen official. No grand gesture, no confrontation. Just a clean line through a shared name. Now, holding the final copy in my hands, I realized it wasn't revenge that made my heart steady. It was clarity, Ryan had always mistaken calm for weakness. He would never understand that peace could be the sharpest response. I slipped the document into the envelope and sealed it carefully. My handwriting on the front was simple, deliberate. Ryan Matthews. No return address, no note. He didn't deserve an explanation, and I didn't need one anymore. At the post office, the clerk weighed it without comment. "Standard mail?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "No rush." When I dropped it into the metal slot, the sound was soft, just a small thud. But inside me it echoed like thunder. Walking back to the car, I thought about how many envelopes had marked our story. The first one, the one that ended everything, had been born of pain and preparation. This one came from peace. Both carried my handwriting, but different versions of me had written them. The woman who sent the first envelope had been trembling, terrified of what she might lose. The woman sending this one knew exactly what she'd gained. Herself. I didn't imagine his reaction in detail. Maybe he'd open it at his desk, still pretending to have control. Maybe he'd laugh or curse or go quiet for once. Maybe he'd pour himself another drink, realizing the last piece of his illusion had finally slipped away. But I didn't crave that image anymore. I didn't need to see his face twist in shock or regret. His story no longer intersected with mine, and that was enough. When I got home, I made tea and stood by the same window where I'd written my letter months earlier. The afternoon light caught the glass, scattering tiny reflections across the floor. The house felt fully mine now, not because of the paper I'd mailed, but because every inch of it carried only my energy, my silence, my strength. I thought of all the versions of myself that had lived here. The hopeful newlywed, the anxious wife waiting for answers, the silent strategist serving dinner with a recorder hidden nearby. They all existed within me, but they no longer defined me. This new version of me didn't wait by the door for closure. She created it. I placed the kettle back on the stove and let the quiet stretch again, this time not heavy but whole. The chapter was over, the ink dry. As I watched the last of the winter light fade across the yard, I smiled not out of triumph but peace. This time, I didn't wait for a response. Spring arrived quietly that year, not with loud blossoms or grand beginnings, but with small, deliberate signs of renewal. I started repainting the living room, soft sage instead of the dull beige Ryan had preferred. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about reclaiming space, one brushstroke at a time. Each wall I covered felt like shedding another layer of his shadow. The house no longer echoed with absence. It hummed with possibility. I replaced the heavy curtains with sheer ones that let the light flood in. I sold the old dining table, the same one where he'd once sat with that smug smirk, and bought a smaller one, perfect for two or for one, when I wanted quiet. Work, too, began to shift. My supervisor offered me a chance to lead a new counseling initiative for students dealing with family trauma. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very pain that had almost broken me had now become a bridge toward helping others. I said yes immediately. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was purpose. My days filled with gentle rituals. Morning walks with coffee, dinners shared with close friends, weekends spent reading in the garden I'd once ignored. Evenings no longer carried the weight of waiting. Silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was restorative. Occasionally, I'd run into people who'd known us as a couple. Their expressions always shifted when they saw me. Surprise first, then something like admiration. "You seem so different," one said. "Happier." I'd smile softly. "I am." They didn't need to know the whole story. The beauty of peace is that it doesn't demand explanation. Once, I overheard someone mention seeing Ryan at a local diner, alone, looking older, tired. I didn't flinch. Not out of indifference, but acceptance. Life had balanced itself without my interference. What needed to collapse had. What needed to grow did. In the evenings, when the sun dipped behind the trees, I often sat by the window with a glass of wine, reflecting on how far I'd come. The ache was still there, faint like an old scar, but it no longer dictated the rhythm of my heart. Healing, I realized, wasn't loud or cinematic. It was quiet, consistent, and beautifully mundane. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection. Hair unpinned, eyes steady, and I'd recognize her. The woman who had waited for truth and finally chose herself instead. There were moments of nostalgia, yes, but even those felt softer now, like looking at a closed book you once loved, but have no desire to reopen. One afternoon, as I tended to the garden, a neighbor stopped by. "You've really turned this place around," she said. "Must have been hard doing it all alone." I smiled, wiping soil from my hands. "Not really," I said. "Turns out I was never really alone. I just hadn't met myself yet." That evening, I walked through each room, the light bouncing off the walls, the faint scent of lavender, the hum of a life rebuilt. Everything was different, and yet everything was finally mine. Peace didn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrived quietly, sat beside me and stayed. People asked if I'd take him back. I just smiled. I already had everything he left to find. It came on an ordinary afternoon, one of those golden, slow days where peace feels almost fragile. I was pruning the rose bushes when my phone buzzed on the porch rail. The screen showed an unfamiliar number, but the voice that followed when I played the message was one I could never mistake. "Hey, it's me." For a moment I froze. His voice was softer than I remembered, stripped of arrogance. There was a tremor beneath it, regret, or maybe exhaustion. He started talking about nothing and everything, how he'd been thinking about the old house, the trips we never took, the meals we never finished. He said he missed us, as if that word still meant something. I leaned against the porch post, the afternoon sunlight cutting across my face. His voice poured through the speaker, familiar yet distant, like a song from another lifetime. He rambled about mistakes and misunderstandings, about how things got messy. Could hear the sound of a bottle cap twisting, open in the background. Then came the apology, the kind that tries to balance, on the edge of sincerity, but keeps slipping into nostalgia. "I know I hurt you," he said quietly. "I just wish we could talk. Maybe get coffee. I still think about you." There was a pause, the sound of him exhaling, and then the faintest trace of that old smirk hidden in his tone. "You were always the calm one. Maybe you can forgive me someday." The message ended with static, then silence. I stood there, phone in hand, surrounded by sunlight and the scent of roses. Once, those words might have undone me. Once, I might have replayed them over and over, searching for sincerity in the spaces between his sentences. But now they sounded small, like echoes from a place I no longer lived in. I replayed the first few seconds again, not out of longing, but closure. To hear what no longer had power. His voice no longer carried weight. It just confirmed how far I'd come. In the months since he'd left, I'd learned that closure isn't granted. It's chosen. He was still chasing control through words. I had already found mine in silence. I pressed delete. The screen blinked once, then cleared. Just like that, the last thread snapped quietly, cleanly. For a moment, I stared at the reflection of myself in the black screen. Steady, calm, complete. Then I set the phone down, took a deep breath, and stepped off the porch into the sunlight. The air was warm, the sky wide and forgiving. I walked down the path toward the garden, my shadow long and unburdened. The birds were loud that afternoon, their songs bright and unbroken, as if the world itself was insisting that some stories end not with tears or revenge, but release. I didn't look back. He vanished for 6 days, but it took me only one moment to disappear from his life forever.